Okay, today we are going to talk about the occupational adaptation model. And so I have here our Canvas page. This is probably one of the most difficult or challenging models to lecture on because it's unique. And I know I said that about Moho, right? Moho, all about volition and habituation and right, all that stuff. This one is about trying to explain an internal process that everybody goes through, even y'all. Okay, any Southerners here? Did I use y'all right? No. Okay. Anyways, one of the year 2 students is rubbing off on me. She's from Tennessee and she's got a meemaw. Anyway, that means grandma. I didn't know that. Okay, sorry, I'm going to start over. So it explains an internal process that everybody goes through when they're learning something new, right? Or when they're faced with something challenging and they need to adapt. And so occupational adaptation, right? How does a person react? How does a person respond to engaging in an occupation? Okay, and we're all forced, we all have to adapt at times. So now think about somebody who maybe has an injury, a disability, maybe has a developmental delay, something along those lines, right? And when they're faced with an occupation, how are they going to adapt? Right. And as a therapist, we want them to be able to adapt, not just for that occupation, but by taking them through that adaptation process, hopefully they become more familiar with how to adapt and they can apply that as they move forward in their lives. Okay, so that's kind of my little intro. There's a lot of really complicated terms, if you will. And so I have these OA flow sheets on Canvas that I find really helpful. So even as I am reading the chapter and to prep for the lecture, I always have these flow sheets with me. And so they help me understand where I'm at in the process and try not to get lost in some of the terminology, okay? So I'm going to pull up, share screen. Flow sheet. So I have here a blank one. Here's a blank one that I think you guys might find helpful as you're studying, right? For you just to jot down, okay, where is this term at? What am I looking at? So this was helpful for me to fill in as I was reading. The one I'll be using today is the one that is filled out. Which is right here. And the C on 3 constants in the upper left-hand corner, this C got, cut off. So it should say 3 constants. Okay, so I'm going to try, it's going to be awkward, but I'm going to try and flip back and forth and kind of show everybody sort of where it is that we're focusing on when I cover some concepts from the PowerPoint. So again, it's hard to teach. It's a little awkward, but I think it's important to know where everything's at. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint. Try that again. Okay. So I just want you to understand that occupational adaptation is a normal process that everybody goes through, even you, okay? And we can use it to promote a therapeutic intervention. So I want you to understand that there are the three components that are very similar to what we've been covering, such as the person, the occupation, and the environment. My goodness, you guys, everybody's sick. Oh, okay. I know all my kids were sick anyway, so stay healthy, use hand sanitizer, take vitamin C, get sleep. There's there's an area here in this model that really helps facilitate change in our client, and I've kind of been referring to a change agent in all of the models. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that or how we as therapists would facilitate that. And then we'll look at our overall outcomes. Okay, remember outcome measures, right? And so we'll talk about what are the outcomes we want to get from the model. And then for our clinical reasoning, for a case scenario, since this is a normative process, I think it's helpful for you to kind of reflect on maybe how this applies to you. Okay, if you know how you adapt and how you face uncertainty and engaging in occupation, maybe you can understand what your client is facing as well. So this model was developed by Jeanette Schady and Sally Schultz back in 1992. And so this came out of the Texas Women's University. So they have a pretty big OT program, and they have one of the only PhD programs in OT in the nation. So as they developed their PhD program, they wanted a model, a theory, if you will, to help guide their entire program. And so I think what's really fascinating about that is a PhD program, it's education, right? And you are all in an OT program going through education. And so how, again, that kind of brings the reflective aspect to how are you doing when you learn new skills? How are you doing when you learn new tasks, when you're faced with uncertainty? How do you adapt to all of those different things? And so maybe we can kind of think of yourself and your process and your learning process throughout all of this. So our desire, or their desire, was to describe theoretically that this is a normal process that everybody goes through when they're adapting. And our overall goal was to improve OT practice by understanding what everybody goes through systematically when they are adapting, when they are changing to engage in occupation. So just a nice overarching summary of what we're going to talk about, or the main concepts, is a person, right? So like some of our other models, a person is made up of certain things, right? Like cognitive, well, again, this one's pretty similar: sensory, motor, cognitive, psychosocial. And so that's what a person is made up of. So again, if we're using this model, we would want to somehow assess those different aspects of the person. Okay, sensory, motor, cognitive, psychosocial. Occupation is lumped into work, play, leisure, or self-care. Okay, and so those are all expected or based on our main life roles. Okay, so your guys' work might be being a student. You have roles as a student, your occupations that you do, like studying, getting to and from class, taking exams, taking notes, those kinds of things are all part of your occupations of work. The environment is physical environment, cultural environment, and social environment. So they're kind of streamlining things down. And anytime that we want a client to change, we have to take them through the adaptation process. And in order for us to do that, they need to engage in occupation. Our therapy outcomes, so what we want them to achieve from therapy by using this model, is to change their ability to adapt. We want them to become more flexible and to try and problem solve more on their own so they can apply that to future occupations and future challenges with occupations. And we'll kind of become more familiar with the term adaptive capacity and relative mastery. So we have three constants. So remember the completed flow chart I had at the very top, right? The C was cut off, three constants. We have the person on one side, and we have the environment on the other side, okay? And in the middle, we have our occupational challenge that's going to create an interaction between the person and the environment. Okay, so we have the person, we have the environment, and then we have the person interacting with the environment. Okay. We'll come back to that flow chart. So a person wants to do well. They want to be able to master their occupations. Okay, so they have that automatic desire for mastery. It's not like anybody woke up this morning and said, yay, I'm gonna fail my tests, yay, right? Or yay, I'm gonna fail at life, right? Like everybody has a desire to want to do well. So like I mentioned, the person is made up of, or we all have sensory motor skills. So all of our senses, right? Taste, hearing, sight, touch, maybe proprioception, vestibular senses, all of those things that help us to react and move and coordinate. Okay, so that's that sensory motor. We have cognitive, so our ability to learn, and we also have those psychosocial skills. So how do we interact with others? The person can have influences from genetics. Okay, so are you genetically predisposed to certain things? The environment, as well as phenomenological. And so a phenomenological event could be something like a major storm, okay, or a catastrophe, or something that comes up unexpectedly. Okay, and so we think about, okay, how does a person adapt? This is occupational adaptation. So if we had a hurricane in North Dakota, how would we respond? We would go through an adaptive process, okay? Winter storm, right? We all had to go through sort of an adaptive process in order to get here. So as OTs, we need to pay attention to all three parts, sensory motor, cognitive, psychosocial, so that we're being more holistic. So the occupations involve the person, they should be meaningful, and they should involve a process with some kind of a product. Now, the product can be tangible or intangible. When I say tangible, I mean like something physical, right? Like I made myself a sandwich. I made myself coffee. Okay, I have something physically here, it's tangible. Intangible could be something like joy, right? Happiness. Does anybody do anything that just makes you happy for the sake of making you happy? Anybody want to share? I can't think of one right now. You like taking care of your plants. Okay. So you're just going around talking to your plants. Like, hey Bertha, how are you? Right. And so, you know, that interaction is bringing you joy, not a sandwich. okay? Same thing with bathing, right? Sometimes bathing just kind of feels good, right? I like to bathe in the evening sometimes. It just kind of relaxes me. And so I'm just, it's not like I'm really filthy or dirty, right? It's just like I'm doing it for the benefits of relaxation. And again, those fall under work, play, leisure, and self-care. So again, when I was a student, I'm like, I still don't know what an occupation is. Well, it includes play, leisure, self-care, and work. So the OA constants, okay, we have the occupational environment. And so that's the occupation is work, play, leisure, self-care. And so those are going to be influenced by the physical environment, by the social environment, okay, by the cultural environment. They call them subsystems, but we're familiar with them as environment. So our physical subsystem or environment is going to include the time that we have, okay, the space that's available, so like our physical space and maybe our physical materials that we have access to. Our social subsystems are going to be our interactions with other people within a setting, and they're going to be more interpersonal, so how we interact with others that are around us. Culture is going to be, again, very similar, those rules of the road that we know to follow, okay? They're influenced by values, morals, what's right or wrong, ethics, all of those kinds of things. And so you think about, okay, how does the values doing what's right or wrong influence my self-care skills? Okay, what are the rules of the road with self-care here, with our culture? Well, we wear clothes, typically bathe regularly, right? We have hygiene practices, okay? So all of those can influence those areas of occupation. So there are 6 principles of this model. And again, I like to try and simplify these because, again, the theorists, they like to use the words, right? So a person is an occupational being who has a desire to master his or her environment and manifests this through participation in occupations. Where do you bathe at? The shower. The shower's in the bathroom, right? That's all this is saying, right? Your bathroom is part of your environment. And so in order to engage in bathing, we have to navigate our bathroom. Okay, now that becomes more important when we're working with somebody maybe who had a hip replacement, right? And then their environment is like, whoa, this isn't working so well for you, okay? But that's all this principle is saying. We engage in our occupations in certain environments, okay? And we want to do well. We want to master them. We have to navigate our environment if we're going to master those occupations. The environment demands mastery from the person. So aggressive. Okay, and so meaning that if you want to engage in bathing or you want to bathe, right, your bathroom probably is set up in a way that you're going to have to navigate it. So again, if somebody had a hip replacement and they have a tub shower combination, okay, that might restrict their ability to bathe the way they used to bathe. Because after a hip replacement, you simply can't just step over your tub, okay? So we can adapt that environment and give them a transfer bath bench, maybe some grab bars, teach them how to slide into their bathtub, right? And then if they have that transfer bath bench, that will enable their successful participation in bathing. So the person's level of mastery and their environment's level of demand create a press. Anybody have a coffee press? So on one side, we have the person. On the other side, we have the environment. And when the person engages in their occupation in the environment, it creates a press for mastery, right? Pressure that we want to do well in our environment that we have. And that environment might inhibit us, or it might help enable us. So in order to navigate that press, maybe that internal conflict or struggle, if you will, we go through a very normal process of how to respond, how to adapt to that given situation. Okay. So it's very, very normal, again, to want to do well with what we do. We do things in our environment. Our environment has a demand placed upon us that can either support or inhibit us. And so when the person is interacting in their environment, okay, there's that press for mastery. And so that press is going to depend on what roles we're fulfilling, right? Our role as a student, our role as a parent, our role as a daughter, a son, okay? There's going to be, or the press is going to be dependent on the level of challenge. So how challenging is it? Hey, is it a neuro exam or a models of practice exam? Oh, right? So what's that level of challenge? And then what demand does our role have, or what are the expectations that you're placing upon yourself? So if we just take a little moment here and go back to the flow chart. So it shows the person has three constants, right? We have the person on one side, we have underneath that, right? We have the person has the desire for mastery. We want to do well, okay? We don't want to fail. On the other side, we have the environment that places a demand for mastery. So are we going to do good? Are we going to navigate, or are we going to complete our occupation well with what setup that we have? Okay, that's going to create that press for mastery. So we can see that sort of in the middle. How come that's not showing up? We'll try this again. Okay. It's showing on this computer. That's weird. You guys, Bismarck, are you following me though with the bubble sheets? Okay. Okay. So then underneath the person, we have the desire for mastery. Okay. We want to do well. And so what are the three parts of the person? Sensory motor, cognitive, and psychosocial. So if you look on my flow chart, right, I have little arrows, right, that sort of say, okay, these are the three parts of the person. If we go to the opposite side, underneath occupational environment, and then below that, there's the demand for mastery. And below that, we have the occupational environments. What are the three occupations? Yes, work, play, leisure, and self-care. So we're kind of working on two sides, right? So as a person, if we have sensory motor skills, cognitive skills, and psychosocial skills, and we're using those skills in our environment, that interaction is going to be, it's going to cause us to have an occupational challenge. Okay, and so that's where the rectangle is below the press for mastery. Okay, so there's an occupational challenge by maybe I don't have good sensory motor skills, or maybe I don't have good cognitive skills. Okay, but I'm still engaging in maybe an occupation in self-care. And I'm doing that maybe in my bathroom, which is part of my environment. Okay, my bathroom is probably set up in a way that maybe is creating a challenge. So that's that occupational challenge. Now, I want to meet that challenge based on based on my roles, based on what society expects out of me. And so the little box underneath occupational challenge, right, is occupational roles and expectations. Is everybody with me with the flow chart? Okay, does that kind of make sense? I mean, when you talk it through, it's like, well, duh, right? Why do you have to make things so complicated? We don't want to fail at what we do. We do things in our environment. Our environment can support or hinder us, right? What we do is based on roles and expectations of society and culture and all that stuff. Okay. So if we scroll down a little bit here, let's see, we get a little more complicated though. So we're going to look at underneath the 3 parts of the person, so sensory motor, cognitive, psychosocial. Okay, the arrow that's coming down is an adaptive response generation subprocess. Sounds like a way station or something factory-ish. Fábrica. I'm working on my Spanish. Fábrica means factory in Spanish. Yo trabajo fábrica. I work in a factory, but I don't. But I know how to say it if I did. So our adaptive response generation subprocess. So there's 2 parts, and I'll get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so this is where the person needs to figure out, I need to adapt to meet my occupational challenge. I need to respond in some way. Okay, and so this is that internal piece that we don't always see, that we have to trust that our client is going through this. And it's through taking them through this normative process, right, where hopefully they will gain new skills and they'll be able to apply that in the future. Okay, so there's 2 parts of their response generation subprocess. There's the adaptive gestalt. Who comes up with these terms? Gestalt, okay? The gestalt is like a piece of the pie or a pie. I like pie. I made peach pie the other day. The pie represents the different aspects of the person. Okay, we have cognitive, we have psychosocial, and we have sensory motor. So our adaptive gestalt is just a visual diagram that represents how much of each concept, how much of each skill do we need to engage in that occupation. Okay, so it's going to look different based on what skill we're doing or based on what occupation we're doing. So if I want to drink coffee, how much cognitive skills do I need for drinking coffee? Yes. Not very much. Right, enough to go through the motor planning, or enough for me to say, oh, this is hot. Right, that's kind of getting into sensory motor. So on the grand scale of things, my little piece of the cognitive section of the pie, right, that's going to be small. That's going to be a little sliver. That's going to be a baby piece. Okay, my sensory motor is going to be larger, right? And my psychosocial, well, I'm having coffee with you guys, I'm interacting, right? So my adaptive gestalt, if I'm having coffee with somebody, right, and there's that psychosocial piece, or it could just be minuscule if I'm just, having a conversation with one of my cats. Okay, so every time we have it, or every time we do an occupation, right, that adaptive gestalt looks different. Okay, and it's dependent on how much sensory motor are we using compared to the other things, right? So that's why it looks like a little circle with a peace symbol, right? And so it just represents that gestalt is going to look different based on what occupation we're doing. So that's the one part of the adaptive response generation subprocess. That's the adaptive gestalt. The other part is the adaptive response mechanism. And the mechanism is made up of 3 different pieces: adaptive energy, adaptive response modes, and adaptive response behaviors. So now I'm going to go back again to the PowerPoint. So we have, okay, come on. Okay, Billings, can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, great. Where did it go? Like here. Okay. So the adaptive gestalt is a configuration of psychosocial, cognitive, and sensory motor systems in response to the occupational challenge. Again, so it's going to depend on the size. Think of this as the pie, okay? The adaptive and disadaptive responses. So there's going to be the adaptive energy, okay? Those are the 3 components: the adaptive energy, the adaptive response modes, and the adaptive behaviors. So the adaptive energy, so that's the first thing under the adaptive response mechanism. There is primary or secondary types of energy. So when we're adapting to something, right, we can use a primary energy or we can use a secondary energy. When we are, I like to think of this as maybe black or white type of thinking, right? Like when you're learning something new, you're like, okay, these are the steps I need to follow. This is what I'm working on. It's a little bit more black or white. Those are going to be your primary energy. You're focused on what it is that you need to do. You want to get it accomplished. You're following the steps to get it accomplished. Okay, that's so your focus, your energy is primary to get that task done. Okay, or to problem solve that task. Secondary type of energy is maybe what the reading suggests is it's more like using the other side of your brain, being a little more creative. So maybe you're thinking, okay, well, yeah, I'll get this task done, but I'm going to make it really pretty, or I'm going to add some art to it, or I'm going to, be a little more creative and spend my energy more on being creative than actually getting the task done. Okay. So that's adaptive energy and how we respond when we're trying to adapt. Okay. So are we like, no, I'm getting it done right now? Or are we like, oh, I bet I could get it done if I do this or that, or maybe if I want to bathe, I'll just throw a 5-gallon pail in there. Okay, let's try that. So you're being a little more creative, right? As opposed to focused. Adaptive response modes. So every time that we are adapting to something, we can use an existing response. So one that we've already had, that we've used in the past that we know works. Okay, so when you're faced with something new and something stressful, how do you usually react? That works for you. I'm trying to think of an example. Plan ahead. Okay. I think I use the example of driving in the snow. Okay, woke up this morning and there was like 2 feet of snow outside my door. I had to adapt. Well, I've adapted to that in the past, right? I pick up my feet, I walk through the snow, right? I may go a little bit slower. I'm driving slower. I put my vehicle in the snow mode. I had to like, oh, where is that at? Because I haven't used that in a long time, right? So that's an existing response mode to getting to work. Okay, I've done it before. It's worked. It's been fine. If I had never done that before, like maybe I was from California, okay, and I came to Montana or North Dakota for the very first time and saw snow for the very first time. This is a true story. This, happened to some students last year, right? And the minute it snowed, they were in the ditch. Okay, they had no idea. They thought, well, I thought if I just went fast over the snow, like I would just kind of skate over it. They skated over it too much, right? Well, I wasn't getting any traction, so I kept pushing on the brakes so it would go faster, so I could get traction. So that would be a new response mode for that person. Now, after they do that new response and it didn't work, maybe they get some feedback, right? And then maybe they use a modified adaptive response mode where they're like, you know what, this didn't work for me last time. Stepping on my gas really hard. So this time I'm going to step on the gas really fast just for the start of the intersection. And then when my car starts moving forward, I'm going to pull off the gas a little bit. Okay. So they're taking, so your adaptive response modes, you can take what you know works in the past, which is existing. Okay. It might be, especially if you're facing something new, it's going to be a new response. Okay. And then hopefully, right, you can use some kind of a modified response. Now, how do we behave? What's our behavior when we're faced with something new? Well, we could react. Our behavior could be primitive. So primitive means, I think, of monkeys. Oh, that was a gorilla, not a monkey. Anyways, I think of, primitive. So if I had a primitive behavior to a new response, a new activity that was stressful, my primitive behavior might be, I freeze. I'm hyperstable. I don't even know where to start. That's pretty primitive, right? Like, whoa, I have no problem solving skills whatsoever. I don't even know where to start. On the opposite end, your mature adaptive response behavior is, okay, It's just a new thing. It's okay. Gonna take some deep breaths. Let's break it apart into different steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3. We can do this. I got this. Okay, that's more of that mature response to behavior. And then your transitional is somewhere in between. Okay, so again, I don't always have a mature response to new stressful situations. Okay, sometimes I lose my marbles. That might be more primitive, right? But the more times I go through this process, hopefully I become more transitional, which is a little bit more mature, right? And then I get feedback on that process. And I think, okay, I handled that a little bit better. If I could do it again, I would add this component to it. So you're eventually working your way to more of that mature behavior. Okay. So again, this is a normative process. Everybody goes through it. So then, and I kind of was alluding to this already, right? Like with the adaptive response, primitive, traditional, mature, existing, modified, or new, with your responses and your behaviors, okay, is this working for me? And so our client evaluates how well they responded to their adaptation. How did they adapt to the situation? And so we want our client to be able to evaluate themselves in their response and all of its properties. And so there's 2 parts to the adaptive response evaluation subprocess. Okay, and that's the component below the, we have the adaptive response generation subprocess. Okay, so depending on how much sensory motor skills, psychosocial skills, cognitive skills, and where we're at with our energy, responses, and behaviors, that's going to create some kind of a response that we did in our occupation. So we're completing our occupation, right? So that's that middle box, occupational response. Then we go down to our adaptive response evaluation subprocess. So this is where we're evaluating the process. Okay, our client needs to evaluate their process. So there's 2 parts. There's the experience of relative mastery. So how did they master it? Are they efficient? Were they effective? And are they satisfied? Well, it took me 2 hours to get in the shower this morning. That was not efficient. I couldn't stand up, so I couldn't wash my bottom. That wasn't very effective. And no, I still stink. I am not satisfied with my performance. Hopefully that wouldn't be the case, right? But we need to ask our clients, how efficient did you feel with that, right? Or, okay, it took you an hour to tie your shoes. I don't think that's very efficient, okay? But the strategy you used for shoe tying was effective because you were able to do it, okay? Are you satisfied? How are you satisfied? And so again, you're trying to get them to evaluate their own performance. Now, the second part is just assessment of the occupational event. Okay, and so that's just simply, did you do it or not? Okay, so the assessment of the occupational event. Did you do it or not? If you did it, were you efficient, effective, and satisfied? Simple as that. Okay. Okay, now it's coming up. Awesome. So again, we have the adaptive response generation subprocess with the gestalt, with the different person skills and their level of energy, how they react, how they behave. okay? So then they're responding to their occupation, they're completing their occupation, that's the occupational response, and then they're evaluating, did they do it? If so, were they efficient, effective, and are they satisfied? Okay, so then from there, if they're not efficient or they're not satisfied, then they go back up to the adaptive response integration subprocess so that they can try and apply, what would I do differently? Okay, and so then they're trying to integrate that into future use so they can go through the process on the left-hand side again. Okay, so are they going to adapt? Is there anything they learned with these new responses, with their gestalt, right? And so then they're going to go through the person process. They're going to go through the adaptive response generation subprocess all over again, and then reevaluate, did they do anything different? Did that make them more satisfied? And so it's this internal circle that they're going through that we want to take our patients through. Now, when we're engaging in the occupational response, so when we're responding, when we're completing our occupation, right? If we look on, okay, that was what was going on inside the person. Now we're looking at what's going on with the environment on the other side. Okay, so we're engaging in we have our occupational response. And so now we need to assess the response outcomes. Were the expectations of the environment met? Did the environment help us meet our expectations? Okay, so now we're on the other side. If not, we need to modify the environment, or we don't have to change anything in our environment. Okay, and so this is when we assess, were expectations met of the environment? We can say, okay, well, did we need to modify the environment or no change was needed? If we modified it, how did it impact work? Or maybe we modified just our work environment. Okay, maybe we modified something in our bathroom to improve our self-care. Okay, maybe we moved something so that we could have more leisure skills. So there's kind of two processes going on here. The internal part of the person, right? And then the evaluation of the environment as well. Okay, I have got 853. It's kind of heavy, right? It's very theoretical, conceptual. So let's come back at 9:03. Is that 10 minutes? 9:04. Let's come back at 9:04.
And like around their back. Are those are bad? Are those two things so bad?
Okay. So we'll resume here. So when you're looking at, so we talked about how we evaluate our sub-process with, did we complete it? Were we efficient, effective, and satisfied? Okay, and so when we're looking at the adaptive response integration sub-process, so this is where we are sort of figuring out how to integrate our adaptive responses. This is where all the information of the event We store it, we apply it, and so we can use it in our future, in our future. And so if we're going to integrate what it is that we've learned through our adaptive process, we have to be able to remember it, right? We have to be able to remember our process from beginning to end. Our occupational responses that are evaluated either produce a positive or negative outcome, okay? But either can lead to an increase in our adaptive capacity. So I think of those times maybe when I didn't respond as well as I probably should have, right? And maybe it was a negative experience. I can still learn from that. And then next time I do something similar, right? Hopefully I don't, hopefully I make those changes and I have a better response, okay? So even if our client feels like they're failing, okay, or they have a bad day or they have a bad session, okay, you can still take that and learn from it and apply that to the next time. The action of the adaptive response integration sub-process transformed into an adaptive capacity, and that should lead to generalization. So I'm talking about generalization of skill, right? That's, can you use that skill in the future in other scenarios? So really this becomes about increasing somebody's ability or willingness, if you will, on how they're responding to change, right? And the more times we get them to respond to change and go through this process, no matter what situation it is, if they go through the process and they're integrating it, they should be able to apply that at other situations in their life. So I think back when I was a student and I was really stressed out and anxious when I was in OT school and blah, 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 right? Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting I need to do this assignment and I've got this due date coming up and oh, I've got this meeting and this schedule changed and those kinds of things, right? And it was stressful at the time, but then working in the clinic, it's like, okay, so I just had 5 patients cancel today because it's flu season. How am I going to react to that? It's a change in my schedule. It's a change in my routine. Am I going to be hyper stable and just like not know what to do and sit there? Or like, how am I going to respond to that? Okay. How am I going to respond to trying to meet deadlines for all of the insurance requirements? How am I going to keep track of all that so I don't miss one? So a lot of those things that stressed me out in school, I was able to kind of figure them out in school and get that practice. So then it wasn't as stressful later on. And then I was able to apply those same things in concepts and practice with time management, right? Stress management, planning, organizing, thinking on your feet, tolerating a change in the schedule, although that one still kind of messes me up. So it's through participating in occupations within your environment. Where else are we going to engage in occupations at, right? A person may experience a breakdown, meaning maybe they don't perform it very well with their adaption or adaptively or disadaptively. So disadaptively is going to be probably didn't adapt very well. Okay, I think of, having a meltdown, kicking and screaming and having a little tantrum or something. It doesn't have to look that way, I promise. Let's see here. The most important role of the OT is to elicit an adaptive response from the client. We do that through engaging them in occupation. Okay. And so if we're simply engaging a client in occupation, they're going to go through this whole internal process, yada, yada, yada. And it's us as the OT that's going to maybe facilitate changes in the environment. But really, we want to empower our client to go through this adaptation process. And we want to point out those things that they're having to adapt. And we want to point out their responses and give them other strategies for responding more appropriately and adaptively. So this is maybe some reflection. Okay, so I'm gonna pull this in the end. So I have instead of a case scenario, I have like a different thing for you to walk through to try and reflect on your adaptation. But just to kind of finish up here, the occupational environment also assesses the response for the person. And so this, again, as the OT, we really can take a look at that environment and see, do things need to be modified based on their performance, based on what's expected out of them from their environment. And so this helps us determine if they need to be modified in some way, or if we can keep them the same. So again, the one way to change a client for the better is to engage them in occupation so they can go through this process. But we want to look at, are they ready? Do they have occupational readiness? Meaning, are there preparatory activities or performance? Do we need to build some cognitive skills? Do we need to build psychosocial skills? Do we need to build sensory motor skills before we just throw them into an occupation? Okay. Activities, occupational activities use occupations to elicit adaptive responses from the client. Really, it's that client that should be the agent of change because they're the one that's going through the process. Okay, they're the one that's engaging in the occupation. And so it should really be up to us as therapists to be more of the agent of the environment and to help facilitate, to help them recognize what they have control over to change, which is usually their responses, right? We hope that they can reestablish their roles. And we, where did this get? Figure out what that last bullet is.
It's on our copy. It says increase relative mastery and adaptive capacity.
Ah, thank you. Increase relative mastery and adaptive capacity. And so that's exactly, hold on a second. That's exactly what our aim is to do, right? Is we want them to tolerate, there we go, increase relative mastery and adaptive capacity. So we want them to increase their ability to adapt more readily on their own so they can apply that in their future with other challenges. Does that make sense? Kind of struggling here with the screen sharing. Billings, can you see the, no? Let's see here. So the screen sharing is not working right now, which has never, ever happened to me with Zoom. Only Teams. So I'm gonna just try and talk through some of the other slides here So our next slide is adaptive capacity. So that's our ability to adapt. And so we want them to be able to generalize and use various adaptive responses given their different scenarios they're in. So can they identify sources? Meaning, so what we're going to do as therapists is we're going to try and help them problem solve what went wrong. What can you do differently? Okay, we're going to sort of prompt them and help them create new strategies and tools so they can apply them to future challenges. So the next slide on clinical reasoning steps is who is the person and how did they experience the demand for mastery? Those are questions that we want to ask about our clients to ourselves to try and help us reason through who they are and what is their demand for mastery like. We need to find out what their occupational environment is and find out what those demands are. What does the client experience through the press for mastery? So as they're engaging in their occupation, in their environment, what is the press? Okay, what are those challenges? And then how do they adapt? And what is their current adaptive process? So again, are they more primary focused? Are they secondary focused? Are they, do they have new modes of behavior? Do they have existing? Do they have modified? All of those different things. What are their behaviors like? And so we want to find that out, and we certainly can find that out through observations. So our next slide, model overview. Let's take a moment at your tables, if you will, and Billings, feel free to have a short conversation. What do you think the unique qualities are, the strengths, challenges, applicable populations and treatment settings that would be more appropriate? So I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to discuss, and then I'll kind of see what you think.
Yeah. Say this, and it's exactly. Yes, more like. It was very, yeah. Because there's so many it's not like going down to just all. Yeah. And even just like. Adapting this that so even that is like for better long. What is yeah. I feel like it's a lot like I need to come from that one just kind of first thing. I think we'll hang out.
Okay, so what do you think some of the unique qualities and strengths are? And then Billings, I'm going to ask you to talk about challenges and maybe populations and settings. So Bismarck, qualities and strengths.
That it's normal to like not always be successful, but that you have to be able to adapt to it and so that will like clients can focus more on getting better rather than, oh, I can't do this.
Right. So it kind of has that strength focus, right? And validation, right? And validating to your client that, hey, this is a normal process. It's normal to feel frustrated, right? This is a new experience or this is a new way of doing this occupation. So it's completely normal to feel this way. It's my job to help you maybe build those skills so you can tolerate more adaptations later in your life, right? So you can problem solve things on your own as things come up. So I think it's really empowering to clients, or it can be really empowering to clients and help sort of delineate our role. So I agree with that. Other qualities and strengths.
It's kind of unique that it talks about that the process is, you're talking about how it's sort of similar to the last one. But what was, that was promotion.
Yep, yep.
It's like a little bit further and like, yeah, I thought that was like being, and it could be a strength too.
Right. So to try and summarize that, when we looked at MOHO, you know, there was an emphasis on volition, right, or motivation. And here they go in a little bit deeper, right, into mastery, right, capacity. So there are some similarities that we see with MOHO, but I think this one does get a little bit more detailed and specific with that, with those concepts. And again, it's I think very unique that it's describing something that's internal that we can't always see, right? Billings, what do you think some of the challenges and populations or settings you think it would be useful for?
I think the biggest challenge is how lengthy it is and how many parts there are, and that they use a lot of big words that might not be understood by everybody. And that can be hard to even apply the model when that's the case. Even just having to look at the flow chart to remember what comes next could be kind of a challenge. And then for the settings and population, I feel like you could apply it to anyone, but I think maybe like older adults would be better because you could show them like where it's kind of going wrong and maybe they could understand and want to change it. Whereas kids or younger people might not really understand or appreciate the model.
Right. I think of the kids, like the young kids that I've worked with that are, you know, having meltdowns. It's perfectly normal for you to go through the adaptive response generation sub process right now. And so I'm going to ask you, was your shoe tying experience efficient, effective, and are you satisfied as they're pulling their hair out, right, and biting you and spitting on you? So I would agree with you that, you know, I think somebody with pretty strong cognitive skills already that can understand the therapeutic process and what it is that you're trying to do, I think would be well suited. I feel like working in hospitals and outpatient clinics, there's a sort of expectation clients have, and maybe it's just culturally here or regionally, where I'm going to you to get fixed. And so if you're saying, you know, like, well, it's normal to feel this way. It's, I'm going to take you through this process and you're going to be able to apply this in all your situations in your life. It might be a little broad for some. Now, that's not to say that I don't or I wouldn't use these concepts, but I would certainly have to sort of simplify them and not necessarily call them an adaptive response generation subprocess or an occupational response or an adaptive response integration subprocess. Did I say that one already? See, I don't even know. But anyway, so I would like, it's perfectly normal for them to go through this, and it's helpful for me to know that as a therapist. And it's helpful for me to know that it's my role to sort of help them and give them skills so that they can further adapt, right? But I agree with you wholeheartedly that the terminology is kind of a lot to take in for myself. Yeah. Okay, so let's see here. University of Mary monthly test. This is a test of the emergency notification system. There's a Billings, you probably can't hear it. There's like a siren going on outside. So I have a activity that's on Canvas. It's titled OA activity. And my screen sharing still is down on Zoom, but Billings, if you could just open that up. It's the 704 OA activity. And I'm just walking you through different things to think about to go through this model and to try and understand the model better, okay? And so choose an occupation that you need to do for work. So what are the three, or that you need to do? What are the three areas of occupation? Work, play, leisure, and self-care. So go through, think about an occupation in one of those areas and describe the physical environment, the social environment, the cultural environment, and how each of those may influence that occupation you're thinking about. Okay, so from there, we'll go down to the role expectation and challenge. And again, have your flow chart handy, right? So you can see where you're going through the system at. How do you interact with your environment? How does your chosen occupation contribute to your roles? When you're looking at the person, okay, what's that adaptive or what's that gestalt look like? Okay, so how much sensory motor are you using? How much cognitive are you needing to use? How much psychosocial are you needing to use? Okay, so draw that out. How big of the piece of the pie are each of those different areas? You can go through and describe your adaptive responses. And then evaluate, right? So did you complete it? Did you not complete it? Were you efficient, effective, and satisfied? Maybe you are satisfied, but maybe society wouldn't be satisfied. So then I take you through how you would integrate that, right? And then looking at the opposite side of the flow chart is the environment. So other things to consider when you chose your occupation, how would you explain that press for mastery? Okay, think of a time when you needed to complete something in an adaptive way, and how does this process look for you in that scenario? Think of a time when you've learned something for the first time. How does the process look for you in that scenario? So again, I'm kind of thinking about those different adaptive response mechanisms with energy, response modes, response behaviors, right? How did those look? I know when I experience something new or unexpected, I certainly see room for improvement. And so OA states that the role of OT is to assist the client with their adaptive response generation subprocess and with the environment through the use of completing occupations. So how would you use this information to further guide your OT evaluation, your intervention, and your therapy outcomes? So I'll let you guys sort of work on that. We only have what 35, 45, what 15 minutes. And so go through it, start working on it, use the flow chart, and if you want to do it together in partners and think of things, feel free. Just talking through it. Yeah. So not turning it in, Billings, just talking through it.
There is. I think we're just.
And Billings, are you okay if I end so I can start converting the file? If you have any questions as you're filling this out, please let me know. It is kind of a heavy model. But let me know. I just want to get this converted and shared to your peers as quickly as possible. Okay, thank you.